Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next installment of An Astronomer Critiques Creation. It's been about a week or more, maybe a couple days more since my last post. We have COVID to thank for that, so I am feeling better, thankfully, and my voice is finally back. But um, what I want to do today is I want to look at more God of the Gaps, okay? And we want to talk a little bit more about what God of the Gaps is, where we find it, and um, then we'll jump into the Ark encounter between Bill Nye and Ken Ham again. But I wanted to start with a quote by Dietrich Bonhofer. And Dietrich Bonhofer was the German pastor slash theologian in who operated in Germany pre-Nazi era and then during the Nazi era. And he was an adamant opposer of Adolf Hitler. Um, he adamantly opposed the Nazi Party, their platform. He helped numerous Jews escape out of the country and eventually took up in part of the assassination plots to kill Hitler, and was caught and spent time in one of the German prisons, and was executed shortly before the Americans liberated those areas. If I remember right, it was just by days. As a matter of fact, he was executed, and then just days later, the Americans liberated that area. But while he was in prison, in the Nazi prison, he read and wrote voraciously. And one of the books that he read was a book on physics. And he gives this quote, right? He gives this quote, and I think that this quote is very prescient. Um, and so he says, Weizsäcker's book, insert German here, is still keeping me very busy. It has again brought home to me quite clearly how wrong to use God as a stopgap for the incompleteness of our knowledge. God is no stopgap. He must be recognized at the center of our life, not when we are at the end of our resources. And what he's saying here is, if you're going to maintain a faith in God, your faith cannot be dependent or derived from the fact that we have not um, found everything in nature scientifically, right? You can't derive that as one of the bases of your faith. If you do, then that is a stopgap. Okay, I don't know why this is occurring, therefore God. But science is relentless, and science will continue to press. And as long as science presses, it will be very, very difficult as more and more discoveries are made, and some of the things that people understood to be God or used to maintain a level of faith, those things will be destroyed as science marches on. And there are plenty of things that we still don't know that some people use God as an explanation for. But with every little incremental gain in knowledge, um, over time those gains add up. And there's no reason to think that eventually, if there's a phenomenon that falls under the natural world umbrella, there's no reason to think that we won't eventually solve that issue. We won't eventually figure it out. So it's a very poor substitute, really. God of the Gaps is a substitute for genuine faith, in my view. If you're going to maintain a faith in God or any religious viewpoint, it cannot sustain itself as a part of its foundation the idea that because there are things in nature we don't know, therefore God. That is a flawed premise from the beginning, given that we will eventually make progress on something that somebody uses as that foundation. So here's my challenge. Okay? Here's my challenge. For anybody watching these videos who wants to take me up on this, find an example where God was invoked as a causal mechanism, and as a result, science stopped its investigation of that phenomenon, issue, concept, whatever you want to call it. Find me an example where God was invoked and in a natural phenomenon, something that would fall under natural science, and the scientific community go, well, that's it. We don't need to do anything else. We've got God now. You won't find it. I'm highly skeptical that anybody could find an example that science yielded on this point for. And again, this is not to say that God is perhaps not the author of things. It means that if you're going to accept that premise, it has to be a more robust view and a more mature view than simply, there's things I don't know, therefore those things must be God. I'll be intrigued if anybody's willing to take me up on this, and if so, what you find. So now let's dive back into the video, and we pick this up with Ken and Bill talking about the development of information via evolution.
Says it's so evident that there's God. I mean, you look at DNA, a language system, an information system. We never see evidence that came about by natural processes.
Well, I claim we do, so we disagree.
Oh, can you give me an example?
Example of what?
Matter producing information. There's billions of bits, zillions of bits of information on this. So can you give me an example of...
Well, her, she's a good example.
Yeah. She's here, but how did the information arise from matter?
We don't know. So I find that extraordinary and exciting and wonderful.
I do.
We don't know.
In the beginning, God
That's
created.
Science.
Okay, so this is actually a perfect example of what we were talking about. Ken presents Bill with a riddle. Where does information come from? We don't see information under natural causes getting more complex. And therefore God. And this is purely God of the Gaps. We don't know biologically yet how life arose. We don't know how the first genetic information and material gathered themselves into the proteins and amino acids that became DNA. We don't know. But to simply say that in the beginning God is to then what Ken is saying is that because I have that explanation, I don't need to go any further. I would ask Ken, what's going to happen to your worldview when we do make that discovery? And his answer is probably nothing. And if you watch the debate, the original debate, he essentially says that during the question and answer. Somebody asks him what it would take for him to change his mind, and he would say nothing. And I would still posit, even if we find a natural mechanism that actually allowed life to arise, does that in any way, shape, or form have to diminish God? No. It simply means that I'm not dependent on that little piece of scientific ignorance to place God. So I would challenge Ken very strongly and ask if and when we do find a causal mechanism, because he's refusing to take the thought any further. That's what I'm getting at. He's refusing to take the thought any further for physical investigation because he's satisfied that God did it. So when you refuse to take things further in scientific and natural investigation, that is when you are no longer doing science. And this is what Bill is trying to get through to him. But when two people so fundamentally disagree on the definition of what science is, it's an uphill battle.
I think I know. I think that, I know that it all came from God.
In the beginning,
Okay,
God
I'm
created.
open-minded but skeptical. And so here's where we have difficulty.
I have a question for you. Why do you think that, most living things all have, a nose and 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 mouth?
Welcome to our world. This is the main idea in all of biology, my dear. This is the fundamental idea in life science. It's evolution.
Okay, so if you
So
ever
this
see-
is welcome.
Okay.
Welcome.
But can I say something?
Please.
If you've ever seen, paintings all by the same artist, they all look really similar, right?
I guess.
Yeah, so if we were all made by the same artist, how come we all have
Okay,
the same
but what makes you say we were all
structures?
made by the same artist?
Because I believe that God created us all.
Okay, so in other words, you went back to a miracle. Do you see what I mean?
Well, so,
Yeah, but
as much of a miracle as the Big
how
Bang.
could this not
Okay.
be a miracle? How do
Okay,
you think
well,
you
so
could understand everything?
You said you can't explain how
So-
matter produces
But
information.
for me, that
So appealing to miracles, and I've belabored the point ad nauseum by now, that when you appeal to miracles, you're no longer doing science. It is quite possible that miracles happen. There's no reason why they couldn't, if God is real. But once you start talking about them, you aren't doing science anymore. And part of the reason is because miracles, at their fundamental level, when you try to marry them to science, become God of the gaps by default, essentially. I have this thing, and I don't know how to explain it, therefore God did a miracle, and that's that. So appealing to miracles is inherently anti-scientific. And the only people who will claim that it is scientific are the people trying to defend this particular view. Okay, now that doesn't necessarily mean this particular view that Ken Ham has, but the view that God created things. Now, you can find young earth creationists in other religions. This is not a ubiquitously Christian viewpoint, but it is a very popular viewpoint among Christians, particularly in the United States. And the young earth creationism from the Christian standpoint is one of the dominant views of this type across the globe. So the point here is, as soon as you say miracle, it's not science. You're appealing to something that you cannot test. And science is, by definition, the rigorous testing of ideas. if you want to give God glory for your belief that he caused all of nature to come into being, that's perfectly fine. That is your prerogative. You're absolutely free to practice that ideal however you so choose. But that is not science.
That's exciting, not proof that there is an entity.
And I think it's really exciting too that you can see how great and awesome this is.
It's astonishing. So you and I are made of the same material as exploded stars. So you and I are at least one of the ways the universe knows itself.
So you're saying that the stars created us?
So for us,
How is that any more less? I mean,
So you're saying the stars created us, not with intelligent agency. Okay. And Ken knows this. This is another reason why I have to believe that Kent Hovind and most young Earth creationists are disingenuous rather than sincerely misguided. Although I do believe they are that as well. This is why I believe that they are not honest about their framework, the framework within which that they operate. Ken knows the secular talking point here. Ken knows the secular ideas about how we think the solar system came into being. And the astronomers that write for the creation journals and who are on the staff at the Answers in Genesis headquarters are more than familiar with the ideas from astronomy about how the solar system formed. And the current hypothesis is that there was gas and dust that was left over from a previous supernova, and the material from that cloud condensed and formed our solar system. And that's the most logical, natural explanation that we have, given what we know about planetary formation, given what we know about star formation that we see, and given that the material had to come from somewhere, and naturalistically, a previous exploded star is one of the best ways to get enriched material. So Ken knows this, and so he's kind of trying to pin Bill into a corner, and he's asking Bill a very loaded question here, and you can say, well, he's just trying to make a point. He's trying to make Bill's stance seem less than what it actually is. He's trying to make Bill's stance seem ludicrous. Okay? He's trying to make Bill's stance seem untenable. And the unfortunate part is, for a lot of the people hearing this at the Ark, accepted this because this is the logic that they have been taught and indoctrinated with most of their, if not all of their life. And so Ken is kind of phrasing this question in an attempt to make it seem ridiculous that stars don't have creative agency, right? Like, why would I accept that stars, I'm made from stardust when the Bible says I was made by God, if stars don't have intelligent agency? And again, that is just simply a disingenuous stance.
How
Well,
is
to us,
being
it's-
exploded by a star more believable
Okay.
than God could be?
Don't you have
So
don't you have a blind faith, Bill?
no.
Because you said
No,
everything
I've
came about by
observed it.
natural
I've
processes.
observed the stars moving apart.
Have you?
So he's wanting Bill to admit that Bill has a blind faith in what some people would term scientism, or the idea that science is everything that there is, or at least that science is the end all to be all of the way that we gather knowledge as humans. Science does operate on a level of faith. To do science, you have to have faith that the scientific method is, if not the best method we have to investigate the natural world, that it is at least a very good one. It's at least the best that humans have developed. You do have to have faith in that statement. But it's not a blind faith. The results of science speak for themselves. Okay? We know a lot about a lot of things. Do we know everything? No, of course not. But to pretend like we know nothing, or that we know the equivalent of nothing because we don't know everything, is ludicrous in and of itself, right? And so Ken is trying to paint Bill or pin Bill into some corners here, and in my view, very disingenuously, because Ken knows better. If you've interacted with science as long as Ken claims to have, this is Science 101. This is the philosophy of Science 101. And so once again, this is why I claim Ken is somewhat disingenuous.
Observed stars form people?
Not yet.
But
By
have-
the way, everybody,
but
you
have
are
they?
living at a time when it's very reasonable that
We have not observed stars create people in a direct way that Ken is wanting. The same way that Ken wanted labels in English on ice cores, which is ridiculous.
we will find evidence of life on Mars or evidence of life on Europa, the moon of Jupiter, with twice as much
Hey, there was just-
seawater as the Earth.
There was just an article the other day where they now said, I think it'll be another 1,500 years before we find
Well,
evidence.
I
of
disagree
life."
with that. I work at the Planetary Society, and we
Okay.
don't feel
But
that
they've
way.
been searching
Have
for
you
years
seen-
and they've never
what have you
found
seen
any
that
evidence.
does show that?
I would love to see the article that he references that said it might be another 1,500 years. Bill is part of, and I believe he's the CEO of the Planetary Society, and they're very active in advocating for funding for space research, for satellites, for human exploration in space, specifically the moon and Mars. We would love to send a probe out to Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, that has ice on its surface and then an ocean underneath. And we're relatively confident that the ocean has more water than all of the oceans on Earth combined. And as a result, especially with the fact that the water should be very rich in minerals, be very salty, we would love to drill down and take some samples and see if there's life down there. That's not going to take 1,500 years. It might not happen in my lifetime, but for the younger viewers who might be watching this, people in your 20s, don't be shocked if it happens in your lifetime. It might happen in mine. It might happen within the next 20 to 30 years. given the fact that it took 20 some odd years for the James Webb Space Telescope to finally get launched, I'm not holding my breath that this would happen in my lifetime, given that we aren't actually in the process of building any probes to do this right now. But if NASA at some point in the near future decides that this is a worthwhile investment, they could build the technology relatively quickly, and launch something in, say, a decade or so. So it's not entirely out of the question that this could happen. It most the one way that it would take more than 1,500 years is because we humans killed ourselves. We wiped ourselves off of the planet before we got this done. That's one way that it would take more than 1,500 years. Outside of humans crippling ourselves and or destroying ourselves, it'll be on the order of decades. Okay, it might be a century, but it'll be on the order of decades. It'll certainly be less than 200 years. There are people on this planet right now who will be alive if I'm not as well when this happens. So,
Say it again.
What have you seen that does like show proof?
Oh, well, so this year, last October, scientists are convinced that water flows on Mars every Martian summer. Water flows down. There's all this sub-sand ice on Mars. Everywhere we look on Earth, everywhere we look, and we find just even the little dampness, there's something alive.
But
So
do we find
everybody-
that on Mars?
So not yet. So everybody, if we were to
So, have we found that on Mars? Not yet. We have rovers on Mars. We've had landers on Mars. We've had satellites orbiting around Mars, probes. Water on Mars is such a new discovery. It wasn't until 2015 when we firmly had strong evidence that some of the sub-sand water, when the ice would melt, would flow up to the surface and kind of trickle down rocks. And this is not happening constantly all over the planet, like when we have a river that flows down, say the side of a hill, or travels for hundreds of miles like the Mississippi or the Ohio. These are just little trickles. And so we have not had rovers fortunate enough to be the objects that capture these events. So we have not directly taken the samples using the rovers that we have. The water flow on Mars is sparse and far between. But what Bill's point is, everywhere that we have water here on Earth, we find living organisms in it. And so if we can get samples of the water, then it's quite possible that we could find evidence for microscopic bacteria or some form of microscopic life. So we have, lots of opportunity. Now we also need to be very careful, because there's a principle involved here, and that is that lack of evidence does not mean evidence of lack, right? Or absence of evidence is not evidence for absence. And what that means is, just because we haven't found anything yet doesn't mean we won't. We cannot say definitively that something is disproven when we don't find evidence for it occurring, the same way that you have to accept it as true when you find that evidence. We would have to accept life being elsewhere in the universe as true if we could confirm that we found microscopic organisms on Mars. Now, even if we find a microscopic organism in a salty water flow on Mars. That's still an uphill battle, and it should be an uphill battle, because we will need to make sure that we have every other alternative explanation accounted for, namely contamination from Earth. Are we 100% sure that that organism is not a stowaway on the spacecraft from Earth? Our labs are really, really good at disinfecting things, but they're not perfect. So every spacecraft that's launched is still going to have a couple of microorganisms or two, and we would have to make sure to rule out that those organisms that were found were not from Earth.
To discover evidence of life on Mars.
But
Does it has DNA?
But
Okay, one way we'll not find it, Mr. Ham, is to not look. That will guarantee us not finding it.
but it
Yes. If we absolutely commit to not looking, we will not find it. That is for sure.
doesn't. You haven't found it though.
Not yet.
No, I just want to.
But we have very
make
reasonable
sure.
places to look.
But we
By
do
the way,
find-
the planetary science budget is about 1.6 billion.
But we do find
It's
evidence of life all over
it's
Earth, right?
9% of the NASA budget. It's less than a cup of coffee per taxpayer. Yet that's where we make these extraordinary discoveries. If we find life,
You did discover something?
not yet. That's why we want to build the next rover in 2020 to look,
They've
and the
been
one
looking,
after that in 2022.
they've been looking for
and
years,
20
haven't they, for life in outer space?
Yeah, the space
And if I have a question.
space exploration is only 50 years old, Mr. Ham.
And if you do find something,
We've been looking for life all over space. In so much as we're capable, Mars is really the only place that we've even remotely scratched the surface. And there, I would say that we've only remotely scratched the surface. Now, yes, of course, we've been to the moon, but nobody expected life on the moon. We know that the conditions on Mars are far more favorable, and likely were very favorable in the past. If we don't find current life, it's very possible that we might find fossilized microbes. So, who knows? Okay, who knows?
what is that? What would that?
What would it mean to you?
What would it mean to me?
Yeah, what does it have DNA?
I don't know.
Or not.
We would have to check, wouldn't we?
So, or would we look in a book? For
See,
it?
they're just all speculative things. And,
They're
and you-
fantastic things.
You know that you
They're
haven't
fantastic
found life.
things to speculate upon. Furthermore,
Why is it fantastic?
it is not, I'll tell you why. I have purchased a Martian meteorite from a guy in Colorado that collects them. When you go to Antarctica and you find rocks on top of the ice, where did the rocks come from? There are no mountains anywhere around. They came from space. They're meteorites.
What
Listen,
if I-
I don't understand how you think that we can understand everything that's out there. Like, are us little
It's a
humans-
quest.
I
That's
know.
what's so wonderful.
I know, but
That's
you-
what's so inspiring.
You act like you have
A process
understand
by which
everything
we can know
exactly.
the universe. Yes, we can know the cosmos and our place within
But
it.
like, why do you think that like our technology and our like evaluation of science is as developed as it's gonna get?
No.
So how do
Absolutely
you know
not.
that the stuff that you think you know now?
It's going to change. I guarantee you, everyone.
So then you're saying
There
that
are
you're,
things that I accept as true that are
that
not.
are not true.
And that doesn't bother me. That excites me.
What? How?
We're going to make discoveries
But how does it not bother you that things you believe you know are not true?
because we have a process by finding out the truth.
And again, this is the absolutely fundamental difference between religion and science.
When I was a kid,
I just feel
I
like
am
you're
so.
making it so difficult
No,
for
but let me give
yourself.
it. No, it's. In other words, to me, what you have is this simplistic worldview that is inconsistent with everything we observe. That's what I find troubling. But hang on, let me give you this one thought, you guys. We find Martian meteorites on the Earth because Mars was hit with an impactor right around 3 billion years ago.
Oh, stop right there for a minute.
Stuff fell into
Wait a
space.
minute. How do you know 3 billion years
So
ago?
let's just say it is.
Okay.
Radiometric dating is not unreliable.
now,
All right.
the same way we say there was a flood 6,000 years ago.
Oh, no,
based
it
on
wasn't 6,000 years
something.
ago, it was 4,000.
Okay,
But I have a
okay.
basis
So
for that.
all that
I have
aside,
a historical record.
all that aside,
Do you have a historical record
yes,
for
we
this
do.
rebit?
So you look at this
what's that
meteorite,
record?
What is your
and
historical
you find
record?
evidence of the Martian atmosphere, the little bubbles in the rock. You find these shock patterns, and you find the minerals from Mars. So it is not crazy. It's extraordinary, but not crazy to suggest that Mars was hit with an impactor through what's generally called a Hohmann orbit, an orbit where it falls toward the sun but ends up on the Earth. You and I are descendants of Martians.
Okay,
That
and
is
that's
not
not
crazy.
And that's not crazy? Is it crazy that you and I are descendants of Adam and Eve?
We are descendants from a common ancestor. I don't
But
know
is
that
it
they went by
crazy
those
that
names.
God made the first man and woman and we're descendants of them?
For me, there's no evidence of that.
So is that crazy?
But
I wouldn't use that word.
What would you say?
It's you're betraying your intellect. You're not using your head. That's what I would
So
say.
you're saying it is crazy?
It's frustrating.
which is more crazy though?
But
being
you're saying we're
descended
descendants
from a
of
Martian?
Martians, and that's not crazy?
I say it is not crazy. It's extraordinary, but not crazy.
Okay,
And
so-
we have a process
so where
by
are the-
which we can prove that.
Prove,
That's what's so exciting.
Prove that we're Bill, I want you to do that for all these young people. Prove that we're descendants from Martians.
I can't prove that right now.
This, to me, that comment right there, Bill, prove that we are descendants from Martians. Bill made the claim that when you investigate these meteorites that seem to have come from Mars, impactors hit Mars, broke pieces of it off, and some of those pieces found their way to Earth. Not surprising. And Bill makes the claim that we can then use those rocks to I do wish he would not have used the word prove. I do wish that. But there's a lot of different ways to analyze what Ken is doing here. One of them is to understand that Ken is resorting to a logical fallacy known as absurdum or reductio ad absurdum. Okay, reductio ad absurdum. And in this fallacy, one of the ways that it manifests itself is to disagree with the conclusion of your opponent's argument and then present a caricaturized version of what they said that is ludicrous or absurd, and then criticize the result or make fun of the result or what have you. And this is a known fallacy. It's a well-documented fallacy, and it's closely related to other fallacies like the straw man, because they're attacking something that's not what the person actually said or what they're arguing for. Bill never claimed he could stand there and prove right then and there that we are the descendants of microbes from a Martian meteorite. Never said that. But that is exactly what Ken is attempting to try and box him in a corner and convince the people around him that that is what Bill said. And Bill says, I can't do that right now. Namely, Bill doesn't have Martian meteorites with the necessary microscopes and tools to investigate the rocks and demonstrate that they contain the material he claimed that they contain. I wish I would have loved to have flipped the question back on Ken and asked something like, Ken, do you accept cell phones are real and work? And presumably Ken would say yes. Almost everybody has smartphones in the United States. And then you can ask, okay, build one. Right here, right now. Build a smartphone. You can't do it. You wouldn't, even if Ken knew how to do it, he wouldn't have the right tools handy. It takes all sorts of machinery, takes all sorts of materials, takes all sorts of very, very skilled knowledge to assemble a smartphone that would actually work. And multiple different layers. You would need machining of materials. You would need to know very deeply how circuits work. And then even if you were able to get the components installed correctly, you would have to understand how to load operating systems from scratch. If you're doing it intellectually honestly the way that he's trying to challenge Bill here, you'd tell him to write the operating system for the computer chips from scratch, and then make sure that that operating system is completely compatible with downloading app stores and all the apps that need to work and all sorts of other things. So building an iPhone from scratch is not trivial in any way, shape, or form, and I don't think that there's anybody on the planet who could do it on a whim, on a tour, through a museum. Likewise, Bill never claimed to have the materials and tools with him. And so Ken is trying to corner him, but again, doing it very deceptively and not actually attacking what Bill claimed, but attacking a related idea to the things that Bill was talking about.
I don't know where you were the last minute and a half.
I thought you said we
want to send spacecraft there.
Okay.
We have a process by which we can make this discovery.
Okay.
And it could be on Europa. There might be something
What if
alive.
there is no discovery?
Well, that's
You don't
also
know
extraordinary. That makes us even more unusual in the universe.
Are you prepared to take, we have a book called the Bible that says it is the Word of God who made all things. You said, here's what happened in the past. Are you prepared to take that and consider it in regard to the evidence you see in the present?
So I claim, Mr. Ham, that I spent a lot of time with it. I read it twice.
Uh-huh.
I followed the guys around on the maps.
Uh-huh.
I decided that humans made the whole thing up.
Okay, so,
Just like this.
but are you...
I'm skeptical. Do you think, what do you say to young people when they ask you about the steel brackets?
Uh-huh.
Did Noah have steel brackets?
I very well...
Did Noah have those extraordinary cranes?
Listen, please let me answer.
Okay.
Okay. Did Noah have steel brackets? Actually, in the Bible...
Now, what do you say to young people when they ask you?
Oh, yeah. I would say in the Bible tells us within 7 generations of Adam, they'll work as a bronze and iron. So, yeah, he very well could have had steel brackets. That's exactly true. Yep. I mean, in the Bible, it actually says that about iron.
So my claim is that's absolutely not true.
And you said...
If you study archaeology and anthropology, you will see the evidence for it absolutely being not true.
Okay.
Don't take
can I
my
know
word
why?
for it.
Do you not see any sort of like metal or anything? Is
It
that
took
why?
way longer than 7 generations to get from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age
But that's
to the Iron Age.
Isn't it possible that people... For instance,
So I've evaluated the evidence. It's not
okay,
possible.
how about this for a scenario?
I can't fly.
Okay,
It's
how
not
about,
possible.
How about this for a scenario?
People didn't live to be 300 years old. It's not possible.
Okay. How do you know that's not possible?
I just say, I've just seen no evidence for it.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So, how about this for a scenario? there's an event called the Tower of Babel that was after the flood, sometime after the flood. People dispersed over the earth. Some people used stone tools. Some people were able to develop technology with iron. Some people built wooden houses. Some people lived in caves. And that all happened as a result of that dispersion. But we live in the present. And so when we go and see evidence of these cultures, then some people are interpreting as Stone Age to Bronze Age to Iron Age. But it's very possible that different people did different things. I mean, if you came with me, we'd live in a cave because I couldn't build a house.
This is where we disagree.
Okay.
I claim it's not very possible. It's absolutely impossible.
Why?
Based on the evidence that you see in archaeology, anthropology,
But if you say it's impossible, then you're stating something absolute. So you must have all evidence.
Yeah.
So you've got all evidence to know that that's not true?
I have more than enough evidence to know that.
No, do you have all evidence?
Well, in other words, can you prove there is a God? No, you can't. It's a philosophical question.
In an ultimate sense, I can't.
Well, let me ask you another
because I'm
question.
a finite being. But I can do this. I can say if there is a God, I'd see evidence of his handiwork. I'd see evidence of creation. When I look at DNA...
Okay. No. Okay, here's why. Philosophically, theologically, it's fine. You can say, if there is a God, what would the universe look like? But scientifically, you cannot appeal to that because God being a non-falsifiable hypothesis means that no matter what the universe looked like, you could always attribute it to him. There's no way, no concept, no idea that you would look at and conclusively say God couldn't have done that, or God wouldn't have built it that way, or whatnot. And so you always have the double-sided coin of, on the one hand, every observation that agrees with what we know about natural law. You can always say, well, that's because God made the universe according to natural law. And then every observation that doesn't agree with what we understand about natural law, you would say, oh, well, God is capable of miracles. There's no falsifiability in the idea of saying, well, if God made the universe, then this is what it would look like. Because everything you would be able to fit under that umbrella. There's nothing that wouldn't fit under that umbrella. There's no way to sift through the quality of data under that umbrella. So again, theologically, that's a fine thing. Scientifically, it is so antithetical to the pursuit of actual knowledge and truth that, again, the only description I can make with it is disingenuous.
That builds life. I mean, regardless of whether they're talking about, we've all got, the two eyes and the nose, we're built on DNA, and what I see is that we never see information coming from matter by itself.
Well, I claim we do. I claim we do.
Well, give me an example.
These people.
In other words, you're saying we're here, therefore natural processes.
So here's what I want you to think about. Here's where I believe Mr. Ham has trouble understanding nature. On my side of it, we claim the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. And to take the time to get your mind around 1 billion is very difficult, let alone 4.5 billion. And in evolution, the fundamental idea in all of biology, the basis of modern medicine.
Stop there for a minute.
No. So we acknowledge that it's bottom up. We as humans design buildings from the top down. We make a drawing, we harvest lumber, and we build this thing. But that's not how evolution works. Evolution works from the bottom up. As the old saying goes, nature has her bad designs eaten by her good designs. And as time goes on, over billions of years, things have changed to the point where you and I are here. So you guys, I really encourage you to take the time to understand 1 billion. If you started counting from the moment you were born, It would take you to your 31 years and a half to get to a billion. Day and night, no sleeping.
Okay, you've been
It's
talking
extraordinary.
Let me ask you a question. You said that evolution is foundational to medicine.
Yes.
So doctors, I mean, they learn anatomy, which you study in the present, and they look at all your physiology. And name one medical piece of technology that's dependent on molecules to man evolution.
Vaccines.
Well, no, wait a minute. Vaccines are developed in the present by doctors looking at organisms in the present and understanding how they react to certain...
So the key word there is
certain-
understanding.
Ken is arbitrarily, well, it's not arbitrary to him, but he's trying to make an arbitrary distinction between macro and micro evolution. The problem with this is there is one process that biologists call evolution. It does have both macroscopic and microscopic manifestations. But it is understood in the biological community that it is the same mechanism that is responsible for both expressions, the microscopic and the macroscopic. And what we mean by that is microscopic evolution or microevolution would be what Ken is talking about here, the rapid change from year to year or over just a few months or whatever the case may be, for viruses and bacteria to mutate, and to mutate to the point where we have to develop new vaccines, we have to develop new medicines, etc., etc. But the development of these technologies is based on the same science and based on the same assumptions that we use to draw the conclusions about common ancestry. And this is the part that the creation side fails to take into account. Hardly anybody debates the fact that viruses mutate, that bacteria mutate, that they become resistant to drugs and vaccines. Hardly anybody denies that. The rub is when people say, but that's just happening here in the now. What about way in the past? Where's your proof for that? And again, we don't like the word prove in science, but we would contend that is the evidence for it, because our understanding that drives how to make new vaccines every flu season is built on the same basic principles of common ancestry type evolution, where we new species do emerge or did emerge some time ago. And it's that refusal to understand that the mechanisms are the same. It is that refusal that is at the heart of this controversy. So I think we're going to leave that there for this episode. And if anybody wants to take me up on my challenge, I would welcome it. And otherwise, I will bid you all a good day and hope you all have a good, safe week. If you can avoid it, try not to get the Rona, and we will talk to you in the next episode. This is me signing off.